Today's group. We have, so that aha moment is what I see when you see a bird in the scope for the first time, or when you get a lifer, right? I'm getting goosebumps right now. That's the buzz we get from doing this. And we work year round to put this on. And this program runs all year. We graduate on May 13th, and we interview on May 18th for next year's class. Okay? So we can't do this program without you, and we love that you guys come every year and help us support this program and other programming like it. I'm going to play you a little clip of what today was like, and there was not just, well, you'll get the idea.
You had to find Spark. That picture's it.
Okay, here we go. So we did a little burden. A little science. Notice how the looks on their faces change throughout the day.
Bill's good.
Shipping sparrow. Blue jay. Bird to come down. Okay.
I'm sorry, you can't hear it, but... Yeah, the sound is just as good as the video. I'm sorry, the sound's not coming through. Watch this. Watch the people in the background's face, too.
That's awesome. Right to the next. Release. Turn it over. Naming it Geoff.
And his comment was, look at that. Ah, she's so happy. And part of what we work on is not everything goes as planned, right?
Biggest guy there's got the smallest bird, chickadee.
Oh.
Check this tail out.
Okay, I'm filming.
American red star, immature female. See, look at the tail. See how bright
I'm sorry you can't hear the sound.
That's a flash.
You can go back, though, and watch this. We did Facebook Live, and it's out there on Facebook Live. You can. That's your daughter.
She goes.
Bye. Have a good life.
Keith's daughter, she told me I was her favorite.
Again, flew down.
This is the. Okay. Thank you. So that is our superintendent of schools, Gary Hogue. And his, well, he's a school superintendent, so for him to even crack a smile is a pretty big deal. And he had as big an aha moment as those kids did. We blew his mind. He was here for 30 minutes. He got to watch a hummingbird be banded. He got to release the hummingbird. He got to talk to the kids about a project they're working on, which is our year-long project was Speaking Truth to Power. Okay? We do that every year, and we let the kids choose the topic. And this year their topic was, we want to be spoken with, not to. So they presented to the school board with Mr. Hogue's support and created, or they are in the process of creating, school advisory councils that students from each high school will bring their grievances to their council, and the council will report to the board and the superintendent. So that's their project for this year. So we have between 12, so 30, roughly 30 kids this year have applied. That's part of the program. They get a panel interview. So it'll be myself, Keith's daughter, another alumni who's on the board, And 1 or 2 of the kids from this year's program will be the panel interview. And we will select from those 30 kids, 12 or 14 kids, which will then go through 12 to 14 day-long sessions on everything from local politics to team building to personal challenges to cooking, birding, I'm leaving out a bunch of them, tourism, how it affects their lives, and something else. It's 1 school year. It's their junior year. And the stated purpose really is that we are trying to help them build a sense of place. So we're helping them know and understand their home place better than they ever would have without our influence, and then we hope that they will then go out in the world, gain knowledge, wealth, and wisdom, and come back and make this place better. We've been doing this for 21 years, and we have 2 alumni on our board. Alex, Keith's daughter, is now my lead mentor. So this program is we have living proof that those kids are going out and coming back and contributing more to their community than we think they would have without this program.
And who is we?
We. Who is we?
Yeah.
The organization. Who puts this on?
Who started? Who founded it?
My dear friend Dave Pollard came home with the idea for Leadership Fayette County after he went through Leadership West Virginia. And it started out very small. They'd have 4 or 5 kids in each class, and then we grew it over time to now we do 12 to 14 kids a year, and they each get a $1,000 scholarship as well as the programming. So, yeah. And when we started out, we weren't a nonprofit. Dave carried 2 paper checkbooks in his back pocket. And I was like, dude, this is like a kiting scheme you got going on here. Anybody know what kiting is? Yeah.
Have you replicated this?
Okay, good. Jan asked me if we've replicated the program. And we've tried. We've thought about it. We've pitched it to other areas. Other superintendents of schools have come in and gone, yeah, this is great. When I retire, I'm going to start this at home. One of the reasons we can do the festival and one of the reasons we can do this program is because of the local support we have. If we were to rent buses, we couldn't afford to do the event, right? But a bus costs $1,500 a day. So we don't pay that because our local raft companies who have loads of buses know and support what we're doing. So that's how the in-kind contributions is the only way this works. Pardon? No, our buses aren't free, but we don't pay anywhere near what if you tried to call up a coach company, which we can't even find one that'll come to us here. So that's just one example of the pieces of the puzzle that make the opportunity for us to do both this festival in the way we do it and that program. So instead of trying to go out to other counties with this program, pre-COVID we started with an 8th grade program, and the juniors were mentoring the 8th graders, and then the 8th graders became freshmen. They moved into a new school, right? And their juniors who mentored them that year were then their senior mentors. And that was supposed to just carry on. And then COVID kicked our ass, and we haven't been able to get back to it. We would love to start something similar to that. I think more so reaching every 8th grader in the system rather than the principal's pick of 8th graders. So we are working very hard to try and do this type of program for every 8th grader in the school system here. There are a lot of other really good programs going on. We aren't the only people who are doing stuff like that for this poor Appalachian community.
My question was, we met some of these people this morning?
Yeah.
Okay, I was very impressed.
Thank you. 2 different groups. The Fly Art group were not the same kids that were in the leadership program. Not that they couldn't be, and I actually pitched the program to them when I talked to them. Okay, we ready? Dr. Bill, you ready? Tim, you ready? Bill was, as he mentioned last night, our first speaker along with Julie Zifkafus at our first festival, which was a weekend event done on a dare, basically. And we held it down at the Tamarack in Beckley, and it looked nothing like this. But, and I was like the naysayer. I was the Debbie Downer of the deal. I totally did not want to have to do this. But the proof of concept was so powerful and so successful in that first weekend event that we realized, okay, this could be really, really fun, really, really good, and fill our hearts and souls with getting to spend time with people like you. And where'd you go? Are you sneaking up on me? And I think a big part of the draw, as you guys know, is the talent that comes in here and guides for us. And Bill has been a shining light since the beginning, a good mentor, very helpful, bouncing questions and ideas off him as we grew this thing over the years. But you don't get to see what he really is good at, and that is what we did today with those kids. I'm going to do everything we can to make sure that we get to do that bird banding session during the festival. We haven't done it for a really, really long time, and it was incredible. And he was incredible with those kids, as you could tell by their reactions and faces and the aha moment, even on the cranky old superintendent when he let go of that Hummer. So thank you, Bill, for doing that, and I can't wait to do that with you again. Take it away. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sweet. Yay. Oh, you get this.
I'm gonna
Strip?
jacket
You're
off.
stripping? Okay, well, I'm going to let you put this on yourself.
No beret today, sorry. Clip me,
Clip you.
clip me.
Easy killer. Good.
Gotcha, thank you. All right, thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
It's not really going to be a test, but I can tell the age of my audience when I use this slide as a focusing. You show this to high school kids, they have no idea what it is. And then you say, well, this is a test pattern for black and white television. And they say, what's black and white television? And I showed this at a conference in Colorado one time, and a woman in the back stood up, and she's waving her hands. I know what that is. She had a sari on, and she had a spot on her forehead. Obviously, she was a Indian woman. And she said, it's an aerial view of the Taj Mahal. And then she said, no, it can't be because the steps are missing right there. So the Taj Mahal is perfect. This can't be an aerial view of the Taj Mahal. But she had a very different perspective on that slide than most people would have. And what I want to bring to you tonight is some different perspectives on my current flame, the ruby-throated hummingbird and Operation Ruby-throat. And how many of you have been on a field trip to the Neotropics with me? And how many of you out in the tent have been on a field trip with me to the Neotropics? There are 4 people holding their hands up out there. And they all proudly wore this t-shirt, and I proudly, hear them yelling? I told them they had to come in and clap at the end, but I don't know if they wanted. But anyway, this whole thing's been going on for a while, and so what I want to do tonight is something I've never done before. But first I wanted to show you the bird of the day for me. And the bird of the day for me, as this technology gets out of hand, is this bird. And I caught that in this feeder out here. I put a trap in there while the kids were here. And I caught that, and they were stunned by its appearance. I was stunned because I've only handled 5 of them in my life. And this is the first adult I've ever handled. So does anybody not know what that species is? It's okay if you don't. Okay, a couple of hands up, that's cool. Well, if you look at the crown, it's black and white, so it must be a black and white crown something or other. Not quite, just white crowned. So white crowned sparrow. Notice the rust on the side and a very sharp crown, kind of a pinkish bill. I was so excited to hold that bird and so were those kids, so I put it on the checklist up here. All right. But now we'll get down to the actual program. So here we go. Operation Ruby Throat, the Hummingbird Project, been around a long time. And tonight it presents a program that I've never given before, so I'm interested in seeing what I'm going to say. And among other things, we're going to talk about the top 10 hummingbird myths. Okay, and plus 2, maybe more. It depends on how it goes tonight. And Operation Ruby Throat is headed up by me. There's my favorite avatar of myself. And I'm Dr. Bill Hilton Jr., as mentioned, and principal investigator, and I'm also the main myth buster tonight. So I'll be busting some myths for you. And my home base is Hilton Pond Center for Piedmont Natural History, the longest name for the smallest nature center in the world. And here we are tonight. You guys, New River Birding Nature Festival. And so here we go. Myth number 10. All ruby-throated hummingbirds at my feeders this summer are females. Now I know some of you already know the answers, but just bear with us here now. Because some people are myth believers, okay? All right, so in the spring, first birds that come back are always adult males. Not always, but 99% of the time. Adult males come back, they start looking around. They've got that ruby red throat that's not pigment, but rather metallic color, structural color. There's the adult male with his forked tail and his red gorget, green sides. And along about 8 to 10 days later, the females start showing up. And females sometimes have a little pale streaking, little gray streaking on their throat. But usually they're just kind of white. And so here's a full frontal view of a female hummingbird. And you can see white tail tips. Not like the male who has a forked tail with black tail tips. Okay? So if you see a hummingbird from the back, a ruby throat, and it's got white tail tips, then obviously it must be a female, right? Well, actually that's not true. Because here's a young male. See the red on its throat? This is a summer photograph, and the bird's starting to get his red gorget, which he will then complete after he goes to Central America and before he comes back next year. So don't go by the white tail tips, because young males with white throats and white tail tips masquerade as females. Okay? So, if that's the case, you better not say all the birds at your feeder in the summertime are females, because some of them might be young males. It's not until you start seeing red on the throat that you know you got a young male. All right? In fact, if you look at my totals for 40 years of work at Hilton Pond through Operation Ruby Throat, hatch year males, young males of the year, make up 42% of the 7,100 birds I've banded. All right? And young females make up 30%. Yeah, adult males are kind of, they're in the minority, greatly in the minority. But that doesn't matter, and we'll explain that a little bit later. So if most of your birds are actually young birds in the summertime, don't be calling all those white-throated birds females, because they're not. So what have we done? We've busted myth number 10, okay? I'm the myth buster, and we've done it. All right, brings us right to myth number 9. Myth number 9 is, well then, if my hummingbird at my feeder has a red gorget, it must be a ruby throat. All right, we're talking about the eastern United States here, because that's my bias. However, this is an adult male ruby throat. And this must be also an adult male ruby throat. But it's actually not. This is an adult male broad-tailed hummingbird, which is the western masquerader of the eastern ruby throat. And the broad-tailed hummingbird male looks essentially like a male ruby throat. And they do come east, and they come east mainly in the wintertime. And you may have heard about western vagrant hummingbirds that show up in the east. This is one of the ones that does. And in fact, I caught the very first broad-tailed hummingbird in South Carolina 2 Septembers ago. First record for the state. So we know they come. All right, how about this? Well, that's another view of the ruby-throated hummingbird. And here's the other view of the broad-tailed hummingbird. And it's nothing like it. Tail is broad and feathers are pointed, but there's no V shape to that tail. Okay, it's not notched. All right, so here's another red-throated hummingbird, and that's obviously not a ruby throat. But it's another species that frequently, probably the most frequent western vagrant in the eastern United States. And you probably recognize this as a rufous hummingbird. And its twin sister, or twin brother rather, the Allen's hummingbird. And the difference between these two is the back. The male rufous has a rusty back. The female, or the male Allen, has a green back. Okay? The females look alike, and you can't tell them apart without doing measurements. Okay? But both of these species will show up in the east. In fact, I banded 2 rufous hummingbirds at Hilton Pond in September and November. And the one I banded in November showed up the next November in Ohio. Okay? Which was very curious. So these western vagrants must be wandering around looking for something we don't really understand yet. So but however, let's see where we go. Here's another red-throated hummingbird that obviously is not a ruby throat. This is the Allen's hummingbird, and Anna's hummingbird, which is the most common hummingbird in California. But there's one in Maine last winter. We're talking about, this sun country bird from out in California showing up in the northernmost part of the U.S. How's that happening? We don't know, but don't assume a red-throated hummingbird at your feeder is a ruby throat. We've smashed another myth. That's 2 down. Okay. Myth number 8. Number 8 says, if you leave your feeders up past Labor Day, your hummingbirds won't migrate. Now people, I give a lot of programs about hummingbirds, and I hear these things. People say these things. They believe them. I've got to bust these myths. I hope you don't have any of them in your head, because it might be painful when I bust them. So, all right. So this is a map I generated that kind of shows the average arrival dates for hummingbirds, ruby-throated hummingbirds in the eastern U.S. And you see that they start showing up on the Gulf Coast as early as the 1st of March. At my place at Hilton Pond, which is right about here, they start showing up about April 1st. Okay, here in West Virginia, they're about 2 weeks later. Okay? And they don't get up to Maine and Canada until the middle of May. So people say, when should I put my feeders up? Well, look at my map and put them up 10 days ahead. Because in the highly competitive race of who has the first hummingbird in your neighborhood, you want to win, and that's how you do it. Yeah, I know some of you are competing, so that's the spring migration. All right. Well, what about the actual fall migration? Well, here's my graph. Again, this is my life on one graph right here. This is all the hummingbirds I've banded at Hilton Pond through last Saturday. Okay, and the first ones I've ever gotten show up on the 27th of March. Most people say, we don't get here till June. Well, that's not true. So I say, put up your first feeder on St. Patrick's Day, which is 10 days ahead of that. Okay, then along about the 1st of July, the graph starts to move up. You know what's going on? That is young hummingbirds are starting to leave the nest. So the population is essentially doubling at about that point. Okay? The next big date is 15th September. And some of you may remember why the 15th of September is so important. It's Costa Rican Independence Day. Yes, Costa Rican Independence Day. But also, it is my birthday. And boy, that was a letdown. So I'm expecting e-greetings from all of you on the 15th of September this year, okay? And then all of a sudden, look what happens after my birthday. The bottom falls out. By the 1st of October, 95% of all the hummingbirds are gone. By the middle of October, 99% of them are gone. And I've never had one after the 18th of October.
Really?
Yeah. These are ruby throats.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
had one.
Ruby throats only.
Late as the 28th of October.
Yeah, but I told you not to say anything until after the program is over now. My groupies are all rowdy people. So what's your point, Bruce? What was that?
Well, I'm just surprised that I would see one later than you would.
Things happen. There's always an anomaly. I'm just telling you what happens at Hilton Pond. Go back to Michigan, Bruce. Now be quiet. Bruce is a good friend of mine. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. I owe Bruce tonight anyway. Okay, so here's one of those rufous hummingbirds I captured. This is the one I caught in November that showed up in Ohio the next year. And so if I leave feeders up past Labor Day, the hummingbirds aren't going to migrate. That's just not true, because they're obviously migrating. They're leaving. They're bailing out. They're going south. Okay? Leaving your feeder up and thinking that's going to make a difference is really egocentric on your part. You know, nature's been around a lot longer than Perky Pet has. A lot longer. Okay? All right, here we are, myth number 7. We're going down pretty fast here. Myth number 7 is hummingbirds get all the nutrition from flowers and sugar water feeders. Yeah, you know that's not true, but let's see how so. Here's adult male ruby throat with my favorite hummingbird flower, trumpet creeper. A lot of people don't like it because it gets rowdy sometimes, but if you knock it back with nuclear devices, it'll stay. Plant it at the base of a big tree and let the vine grow. And the flowers might end up in the canopy where you don't see the hummingbirds, but they know they're there and they're feeding. So this is a great flower. You can find it along any roadside and probably transplant it legally. Another favorite is, what? Yes, okay. And here we have a female, and notice that she's got pollen on her forehead. All right, now hummingbirds don't eat pollen, but they certainly transmit it. So they're very important pollinators for trumpet creeper, okay, and also for other flowers, native flowers. They don't pollinate non-natives very well at all. Okay, so here's a hummingbird, probably an adult female coming to a feeder, but do they get all their nutrition from those sources right there? And the answer obviously is not. A ruby throat needs about 10 calories per day, which is about half its weight. Okay? And a 3-gram hummer, and we caught that male hummer today, he weighed 2.87 grams, which is impossible. That's half of a nickel. You know, just can't happen. Bird the size of your thumb that weighs half a nickel and flies to Central America and back again. Can't happen. Can't happen. But for a 3-gram hummer, that means about 1.5 grams of nectar or sugar water, or about 1,000 flower visits per day. Now when they go to feeders, they probably would have to make fewer visits because it's a lot easier to get into most feeders than it is into many flowers. And so they can probably overload and go fewer visits. Now, invertebrates make up about 10% of a hummer's diet, or about 0.15 grams. Okay? And what do we mean by invertebrates? Well, mainly insects. In fact, if an adult female mosquito weighs 2 milligrams, a ruby throat has to eat about 75 mosquitoes per day. Oh, wait, they eat mosquitoes. Wow, we like them now, don't we? All right? Anything that eats mosquitoes is on our side. So that's a lot of skeeter catching. And do they actually catch them and eat them? Well, they do. Here's a hummingbird in one of my restraining tube, which is the way I band hummingbirds. I slide them in the tube, and then the legs are available for me to be able to put the band on. Well, almost invariably, when I turn that hummingbird upside down in the tube, it makes a little drop of urine. I've always wanted to taste it and see if it's still sweet or not, but I never have done that. But it's crystal clear. You see that? Okay, it's crystal clear. Sometimes in that urine, and it is urine, by the way, just like what we make. Most birds don't make urine. They make uric acid, which is whitewash. And it's insoluble. But urine is soluble, and that's urine. Okay? So I said, well, look at that particular droplet right there, and there's actually a little black speck in the middle of it. And I touched the urine, and the black speck stuck to my finger. And I'm saying, wait, you can't make black specks out of sugar water and flower nectar. So what are those black specks? Well, being a curious scientist, I ran up to the local high school, got out the microscope, and looked at it under the microscope. Now, this is the first thing I found. Looks like a jumble of some kind of parts. Okay? Well, a little closer view. Looks like somebody's wing, doesn't it? And probably a spine. I don't think that's a mosquito mouth part. I think it's a spine from something else. And what that is the wing of a fungus gnat. All right? And fungus gnats are even smaller than mosquitoes. All right? And so this hummingbird's going around trying to catch insects. Now, I've seen them gleaning aphids off of plant leaves. I've seen them fly down on the ground, and what they're doing down there feeding, I don't know, but it's probably some kind of invertebrate. But more often you see this. And this picture was actually taken by Ernesto Carmen, my collaborator in Costa Rica, of a ruby-throated hummingbird, a young male going after some kind of little flying invertebrate. Got to do it at least 75 times a day, because you got to have fats and proteins. And there's no fats and proteins in sugar water or in flower nectar. Okay? So, what do we say about this particular myth? We busted that one out. All right. Number 7 is gone. Let's bring up number 6. Hummingbirds suck. Okay. This was a long thought myth. And then people thought they did something else. But let's see what they actually do. Here's a hummingbird tongue. Adult male ruby throat. The tongue is about twice the length of the bill. A little more than that, actually. And that tongue can't possibly fit in the bill. So it has to go somewhere. So this is a skull of a hummingbird that died. This is the underside. There's the foramen magnum that goes down the vertebral column. This is the lower mandible right here. And here's the tongue right here. And you notice that the tongue splits on both sides. And the tongue actually wraps around the base of the skull and inserts in the forehead of the bird. Okay? And I kind of demonstrated that to the kids today, because I held a hummingbird in my hand and stuck its bill in the feeder, and I said, hold your throat and swallow. And if you want to try that right now, you can. And you can feel the movement there, right? Okay, that's because your tongue is anchored right here. And I said, now put your hand on top of your head. And it does nothing when you swallow. But in a hummingbird, you can watch their feeding and their throat's going like this and the top of their head's going like that. Because that tongue is extending and coming back and extending and coming back and extending and coming back. All right? That's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. And here's the actual tip of the tongue. It's forked. And for a long time, people thought that this little feathery tip caused capillary action to occur and draw in the fluid. Before that, they thought they were sucking it up. But the only birds that can suck are doves and parrots. If you watch other birds drink, they stick their bill down in the fluid, and then they tip up, and the fluid runs down their throat. If you watch a parrot, sticks his head down in the bird bath, sucks it right up. If you watch a dove, same thing. Doves can move their jaw around and their mouth around, and they can just draw water right up. Okay? People thought hummingbirds sucked. They don't suck. People thought capillary action was the only thing going on, and it's not. It turns out that the tongue has two little tubes in it, and those tubes are actually manipulated by the bill. The bill squeezes the tube and then relaxes, and squeezes the tube and relaxes. And every time it squeezes and relaxes, fluid comes up. And that's not really sucking per se. You know, it's not like we suck a straw. It's more like capillary action plus sucking plus something else is bringing that fluid up into the bird's mouth. Okay? And here's some video. And you can watch part of this. This is not my video. Actually came from Cornell. All right, watch this picture right here now. Whoop, you see? The tongue's going out, and as soon as that tongue hits the fluid, those little tubes are pulling that sugar water in. Now, unfortunately, there was red food coloring in that, but they had to do that so you could see what was going on. But here's another one with white sugar water in it. See the tongue split? Okay, in very slow motion. And here it is, a red one again, with a wing getting in the way. But look at that. That's just amazing. And it's got to do that enough to bring in 10 calories every day. All right, I think that's a repeat of what I saw earlier, so it's on a loop. So the question is, do hummingbirds suck? And the answer is apparently not. They don't suck. All right, we're down to myth number 5. And that's hummingbirds must eat constantly or they'll die. People think that. Bill, you can't catch a hummingbird and keep it for a banding demonstration because that hummingbird's going to perish. It's going to die of hunger while you got it in your hand. That's just silly. It's just silly. But people believe it. So I'm here to myth bust tonight, and I hope we're doing that. So here's an adult male perched. Adult males are not feeding constantly. Adult males are defending territories. You know, they're fighting, somebody's saying. They're going after other male hummingbirds. And they're not stopping to eat along the way. They're chasing. And then when the females come in, well, things really start to happen. Here are the males fighting, by the way. And the females come in and they're going to have to build nests. All right? And they're going to have to incubate. Now let's suppose it's, you're in West Virginia, and let's suppose it's May the 2nd and it's 33 degrees when you get up and go to Burnwood. You know, if a hummingbird gets off a nest for more than about 5 minutes, those eggs are going to die. And if she gets off chicks, they're going to die because the chicks are naked. They can't even thermoregulate until they're about 10 days old. So they've got to be incubated and they've got to be brooded. So birds are not sitting or not eating constantly at this time. They're doing other stuff. And there are the 2 eggs about the size of a Tic Tac. The nest is a little smaller than half of a tennis ball. And always 2, by the way. Never 1, never 3. 3 would be too many. 3 would be too many. And maybe all the chicks would die. 1 would be not enough. The female would not be maximizing her reproductive potential. Now, there are some rare cases where you get 3 or 1, but almost always 2. And that's in all the species of hummingbirds across the board. Pretty cool. And here are the chicks hatching out, little naked bug-eyed things that have really short bills. And they're not going to last long unless the female's sitting on them. And by the way, hummingbirds do sleep. I mean, what do they do at night? They're not feeding. So to think that hummingbirds must eat constantly or they'll die is just kind of a goofy thing to think. But we busted another myth here. All right, what do you think myth number 4 might be? All right, let's see. Myth number 4. I need red food coloring to attract hummingbirds to my feeder. I probably don't need to bust this myth for anybody in this room, but just in case, you know, some of you might be stockholders in Perky Pet, and I need to get straight with you right now, okay? All right, Perky Pet happens to be one of our sponsors, but I'm not proud of it. In the old days, people made hummingbird feeders out of liquor bottles and bent glass tubing and a rubber stopper. Some people use Erlenmeyer flasks that they hook from the chemistry lab or something like that. And then they put red food coloring in there because they wanted to attract hummingbirds, and they know hummingbirds are kind of attracted to red, and that's how all this got started. And then the first commercial hummingbird feeder was made by a guy at Cornell Labs named Webster, and it was a hanging feeder that had two little tubes at the bottom and a filling port on the far side, and they made about 50 of those in their lab, glass blowing lab, and sold them commercially. That was in 1950. That was the first commercial hummingbird feeder. Okay, now you've got 30 manufacturers that make hummingbird feeders. Because in about 1990, when Perky Pet really took off, everybody started making feeders. And everybody and his brother and sister has a feeder hanging in their backyard. Wow, what a commercial bonanza. Well, here's a First Nature feeder, which comes from Walmart and costs $4.95. Or you can pay $39.95 and get one from Droll Yankee that's made out of stained glass and copper, and it does the same thing. And it's a lot harder to clean than this one. But here's red food coloring again. Well, here's the same feeder, but without red food coloring. And the point is, why put red food coloring in it now if the hummingbird feeders now all have red plastic on them? You know, if you're trying to attract if you want to tie a red ribbon on there just to accent it even more, fine. But that red food coloring is just not necessary. The feeder's already red. Okay, so here comes Perky Pet again. Well, we want people to buy red food coloring so we can make more money. All right, so we're going to package something that makes 2 gallons of sugar water, and we're going to put red dye in it. So what does the label actually say? It says 60% water. Think about that, where water comes from. It says 40% sucrose, which you can buy in the store for $1.50 a bag when it's on sale. Okay? But it also has citric acid, a preservative. It has sodium benzoate, a preservative. And, whoops, I don't know where it went, but pardon me, we'll click through this here. I'm sorry, never used this before. All right. There we go, 60% water, 40% sucrose, and trace elements, citric acid, sodium benzoate, sorbate, and red 40. Red 40 is outlawed in France, England, most European countries, and probably in Asia also. But we still use it in our own food, and we use it in hummingbird juice. So people complain to Perky Pet and say, why are you still putting red food coloring in there? And the response was, because people want us to sell it. And the follow on that is, people buy it. Yeah. Okay, and we've tried to educate Perky Pet and all the other manufacturers that make red food coloring. And so what does Perky Pet do? Well, Perky Pet goes for the high ground, and they put out the same product with the same things in it, except they leave out the red food coloring. Now I'm asking you, if you're a hummingbird and you weigh 2.67 grams, your kidney's probably going to weigh about 1/10 of a gram, if that. And if you're pumping sodium benzoate and potassium sorbate and red food coloring through those kidneys are working a lot harder than they need to work. So it's not just the red food coloring, but it's also the preservatives. And here's that hummingbird that I had lying on its back in the tube, and all of a sudden it makes a little drop of red urine. What does that tell me? It tells me my neighbor hasn't heard this lecture. That's what it tells me. Because they're still putting red food coloring, and they're close enough to me, so by the time the bird gets to me, it's still got that red food coloring going through its system, and it just doesn't seem healthy to me. If it's an additive, it probably isn't necessary. Therefore, we're busting myth. All right, that one's gone. You already knew all that, but now you know why. Okay, now you know why. Okay, so myth number 3, hummingbirds have no feet. This is a fairly common notion that hummingbirds have no feet. And it sounds ludicrous to us, but the earliest ornithologists were looking at hummingbirds, and they don't look like they have feet. Actually, there are tags tied to the feet on these hummingbirds, but these are museum specimens, okay? These are from about 1890, I think. And, but if you look at a hummingbird closely, first of all, they're in the apodiformes, which means no feet. Pod meaning foot, a meaning not, so apodiformes means no feet. Ruby-throated hummingbird, that bird's flying, it looks like it doesn't have any feet, because the feet are tucked under the feathers, which is really aerodynamic. It's very more streamlined like that. Also in the same family, same order, the same order are the swifts, except hummingbirds are in the Trochilidae. Trochilus is hummingbird, and the swifts are in Apodidae. So they're in separate families, but the same order, and both are thought not to have feet. So I defy you to see feet on that swift when it's flying overhead. You just can't see them. Okay, but if you look at them up close, the bands have to go somewhere, and there's a hummingbird band on the left, and there's a swift band on the right, chimney swift. Notice how similar the feet are. Very short tibiotarsus, just enough room for that band, and long claws. Very important for the swift especially, since it's hanging on the inside of a chimney. Okay, so very stout toes, but extremely short legs, extremely short. Okay, so do hummingbirds have feet? Well, apparently so. So we're busting that myth again. Number 2's coming up. Here we go. Hummingbirds migrate to South America for our winter. And I say our winter because Central American and South American people don't like us to talk about winter. Ernesto used to get mad at me saying, it's winter in Costa Rica. It's not winter in Costa Rica. It's winter up here, but it's not winter in Costa Rica. It's the dry season in Costa Rica. Okay, but it's not winter because the temperature is still 68 degrees. Okay, so it's a very ethnocentric bias to talk about hummingbirds going south to spend the winter in Central America. So now you're enlightened about that at least. You won't be talking about winter in Costa Rica anymore. And trying to help all I can here. So here is actually the distribution of ruby-throated hummingbirds. All right. Ruby-throats have the largest distribution of any of the hummingbirds in the world. Yeah, it's enormous. In red is their summer range, their breeding range, and even though the map doesn't quite show it here, there's been a nest now found all the way over in British Columbia. And I think what's happening with ruby-throats is they're expanding their range northward, maybe. They're expanding their range westward, maybe. And maybe they're going to come right down through Washington State and Oregon, and they're going to take over California. Man. And those Anna's hummingbirds, which are fairly mild, ruby-throats are very aggressive. Ruby-throats are going to be our eastern ruby-throats are going. I'm sorry for you California people, but I know there are some people here from California, but ruby-throats, they're the king. Okay, they're the king. All right. All right. So here's the so-called winter range, Mexico and all 7 countries of Central America. But notice that ruby-throats don't even get past the Panama Canal Zone. They're only in western Panama. And their biggest numbers are probably in northern Costa and central Costa Rica. Okay? Although they are found in southern Mexico in our wintertime. They don't go to South America. no North American hummingbird goes to South America. And the ruby throats have the furthest migration. Rufous hummingbirds that are migrating from way up here only go to about this far. Okay, so ruby throats are really the long distance migrants for hummingbirds in the U.S.
How did the yellow then? Is it none into southern Florida and Texas?
Wait, I'm coming to that. You know me better than that. Well, for heaven's sake. Thanks for asking. All right, so year-round, historically, they've been found in the Gulf Coast of Texas and South Florida. Interestingly, ruby throats don't breed in South Florida. So south of Tampa, you never see a nesting ruby throat, which is curious because that's kind of a tropical area, you know. All right. What?
If they're there all year, which ones stay all year? They don't breed.
No, they can be found there year-round. Okay, so the migrants are showing up there, but they're not breeding there. Okay. All right, so with increasing regularity, ruby throats are starting to show up along the coastal areas. Occasionally you'll see one wandering inland to Minnesota. One tried to spend the winter there several years ago and it perished by about Thanksgiving. Just couldn't make it. And curiously, ruby throats are now showing up in the winter, all winter long, on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Okay, also around Myrtle Beach in South Carolina.
Michael O'Brien has a female that comes to his house.
Hold that till the end, please. Please. Okay. Now, out here on the Outer Banks, I went out there a couple Christmases ago and I banded 15 ruby throats in December. Okay? They're just not supposed to be there. So what's possibly going on? 2 words. How about it? How about global warming? We don't know what's going to happen with these changes in temperature. If it becomes easier for hummingbirds to spend the winter because they're already right on the edge of not having to migrate, are they going to start spending year-round all over the place? And when that happens, what's going to happen to pollination? And what are they actually going to feed on in the wintertime? Is it all going to be insects? Are some plants going to evolve to flower in the wintertime? We don't know. But stuff's happening right now that we don't all understand, so we got to do a better job of understanding and then trying to stop things that we can. Enough of that lecture. So, we're busting that myth. They don't go to South America. Okay? They only go to Central America. Okay, myth number 1. I have a pair or a family of hummingbirds at my feeder. Okay? Now let's think about this for a minute. This is an adult male. Again, the adult males come back first. Females come back 8 to 10 days later. And they immediately get down to business. Okay? And that business is the male is finding a territory. The female is looking for not a male, but a territory. And if the male's defending that territory, he's just something that she needs to get along with so she can get access to what's in that territory. All right? So females don't give a whit about that male. You know, he's just a little sperm package. He's just providing something she needs initially in exchange for something she really needs to feed her chicks down the road. Okay? So the male's defending territory, and the male's doing all kinds of stuff. He's doing this flying J flight that some of you have seen, where they go up about 60 feet in the air and they dive and come back up. And sometimes they're doing this. There's a female sitting on a perch. All right? And the male is doing what we call the falling leaf procedure, okay, or behavior. Falling leaf. And at some point, that female will come off of that perch and she'll join him in the falling leaf. Okay? What direction is that male facing? Always toward the female. Now, does that suggest something about the appearance of a male ruby throat if he's always facing the female? Ooh. There's a gorget involved, isn't there? Okay? And as you probably well know, that right there you can tell that gorget is not red because he's not quite facing the female. But when he turns a little bit and the light hits it right, then the red will be highly visible to her. So if a male hummingbird wants to kind of hide, he just turns his head. And then it looks black. But when he gets back in the right light, it's red again, the female can see it. Okay? So they do this falling leaf thing, and then there's eventually a copulation. Now it's now time for our sex talk. Okay? And if anybody needs to leave the room, I understand. But birds are a little different ball game than mammals are. Okay? You can look at a bull and you can tell it's a bull. All right? Because its gonads are external. Okay? If you look at a bird in its abdominal region, you can't tell whether it's a male or a female because its gonads are internal. What's that an adaptation for? Flight. You're streamlined. You don't want your bull hanging out all over the place. All right? This is why bulls do not fly. Okay. That's a lot of drag, you know. Not very aerodynamic to have your testes hanging outside of your body if you're a bird. So the bird's testes are inside, the ovaries are obviously inside. And what happens with the males in hummingbirds and virtually all other birds except waterfowl, there's no penis. And you got to get the sperm somehow from the male's testes to the female's ovaries. And what happens in males is they get something called a cloacal protuberance. Okay, the cloaca is a single opening for sex cells, either egg or sperm, and also waste material. You know, chicken lays an egg through one opening, that's why the eggshell is always brown, because it's also got feces and stuff on it. Okay, so the male makes a cloacal protuberance. And the cloacal protuberance is a deposit of sperm around the opening to the cloaca. And so when he finds this female, and she agrees to copulate, and she makes the choice, I guarantee you. Okay, the female chooses. The male comes up behind her, she turns her tail to the side, he turns his tail the other way, and they touch cloacas for like 0.3 of a second. And he has a little muscular squeeze, and the sperm are ejected into the female's cloacal canal. And then the sperm go up the oviducts and fertilization occurs. All right, that whole process is what I like to call the cloacal kiss. All right, just like that. I've always wanted somebody to write a poem about that, the cloacal kiss. And well, maybe it's me, I don't know. But you seldom see it. And you seldom see this because it happens so rapidly. It may happen in the air, it may happen on a perch, it may happen on the ground. But I get people that send me videos of these two birds doing like this, and they're saying, oh, they must be mating, and it's two males that are trying to peck each other's eyes out. You know? A whole different thing. You know, a whole different thing. So what happens after the cloacal kiss? Well, the female has probably already started building that little nest out of spider webs and lichens. And what an interesting thing to watch anyway. Just fascinating. And after that first mating, within a day, that female lays her fertilized egg. Okay? And then she skips a day, and she has to cloacally kiss again. She has to copulate again. And then the next day, then she lays an egg again. So they lay an egg, skip a day, lay an egg. Now the question is, who's she kissing? All right? Here's this very aggressive male getting her attention, and they kiss. She goes off and lays an egg. She's got a whole 48 hours when another male could sneak in and steal a kiss. And that probably happens much more often than we know, not only just in hummingbirds, but all birds. And if you watch robins on the ground, you'll see an adult male robin with a really black head, female with a pale head, and he'll be following her around. He's mate guarding right then. He's trying to prevent other males from coming in to get there. So I don't know whether mate guarding happens in ruby throats. I don't think it does because the females probably build a nest outside of that male's territory. Okay? So anyway, maybe this nest has 2 eggs with 2 different fathers. Is that a smart evolutionary thing? Yes. You bet it is. It's what I call not putting all your eggs in one basket. You know, right? Because if you've got 2 parents or two male parents, wow, he's defending territories, and so is he defending territory. So she's got 2 places where she can go to feed, but in addition, if something happens to male 1, then male 2 is still there for defending a territory. Cheating happens in nature. Cheating is very natural. You know, we get a different social stratum in human beings where we talk about monogamy, but monogamy doesn't happen in birds, at least most of them. You hear about birds mating for life, that's probably not true in 95% of the cases. They may mate until the other one of them dies, and then they pick up with another one. But there's always these other birds that are trying to sneak in and steal a kiss. So they're always the one male is always guarding against another male doing that. So that's the sex talk. All right. I'm glad none of you got too irate about that. It's the cloacal kiss. All right. So I want to show you something that Bruce here did. Bruce is from Michigan, and a couple years ago, in the middle of May, he found a hummingbird nest under construction. And he took these really phenomenal series of videos, and they're all up on YouTube now, about 2 hours worth. I've condensed that to about 2 minutes worth here, but it's phenomenal. So look up Bruce Moorman on YouTube, and you can watch the whole thing. And it's better than television, and it's a lot cheaper than going to the movies. So watch Bruce's video here. And Bruce will be happy to answer questions about this after I finish. Okay, Bruce, thank you. All right, so let's take a look at what's going on with Bruce. Here's the bird on the 17th. You notice the nest looks like a pancake here. It's very small. Here's the female coming in. She's trying to form the nest, making sure that the lining is the right shape for her body and for the eggs. And now she's on the nest, but not in the nest. She's riding up high. All she's doing now is just sitting and waiting. Maybe she's got an egg in there, but she doesn't want to start incubating yet because she's got to lay a second egg before she starts. Okay, now she's incubating. She's down in the nest. And she's got nothing else to do but sit there and move her head around. Something hatched here about 3 weeks later. And there must be little tiny babies down in there. And she's taken something from her bill, throwing it up from her crop, and regurgitating into the chicks' mouths. Okay? And she's being very careful because these chicks are pretty delicate at this point. They've just hatched out. And she's doing there she is, moving her crop to make stuff come up. And there she is. Oh, the birds are getting a little bigger. All right? All right? So look at those bills. And those are not black. They're kind of pinkish colored. There's a yellow gape that makes her able to see the target area a little bit better. And there she's moving her crop again, trying to bring up that regurgitated material. And you know what that is? That's porridge. It's a mix of nectar and insects. Not very appetizing to us, but then sucking on teats might not be very appetizing to birds either. So different strokes for different animals, okay? All right, so the birds are in the nest now. What are they doing? Well, they're just kind of waiting for mom to come and bring something to eat. They're kind of stretching around a little bit. Their muscles are growing in their legs. Their muscles are growing in their wings. Their bodies are starting to get bigger. It's getting a little crowded in the nest. They're trying to figure out whether they really are siblings or not. You know, it might be half siblings. You know, who's your daddy? And here they are just about to fall out of the nest. The female can't even get there. They're practically breaking her neck trying to get food out of her crop. And both of them are managing to feed, but one of them is a little more aggressive than the other one. So, and then, wow, the nest has really gotten small. And if you look real closely, that bird on the left has a streaked throat. You see it? The bird on the right has a white throat. I think that left bird was a young male and the right bird was a young female. And here Bruce has caught one of the birds right after it fledged from the nest. at about the 6-week mark after he first found the nest. Okay? So spectacular footage. I just thank you, Bruce, for sharing that with us. So 6 weeks is the parameter. It takes an experienced female about 3 days to build a nest. That's all. Sometimes the female has a second nest that she's built so that after she finishes with her first brood, she can go right in and lay eggs again in a second nest. Pretty shrewd. Okay, pretty shrewd. So it's 6 weeks. So 3 or 4 days to build, 2 days, 3 days to lay eggs, 6 weeks to incubate, and then 6 more weeks as brood feeding the chicks. 6 weeks. The birds are coming back in some cases as late as early May to South Carolina. You got to add 6 weeks onto that. Is there time for a double brood? Well, in northern latitudes, not. I guess Minnesota probably never has double brooding. Northern Florida might have triple brooding because the growing season is so different. Okay, so 6 weeks is, that's a long time. Chickadees do it in about 15 days total. You know? And they're raising 8 or 10 chicks sometimes, which is phenomenal itself. Okay, so the question is there a pair of ruby throats?
No.
They're not pairing. They don't make a pair. All right.
So the male
They make their pair bond lasts 0.3 of a second, long enough for the kiss. All right. It's not a pair bond. It's simply a passing of sperm to the female. All right. So what that means is that myth is just busted. It's just busted. Okay. Well, that's 10 myths, but I said that there might be a bonus myth A. Okay. So here's bonus myth A. All right. That little thing hovering at my flowers is a baby hummingbird. I got news for you. Baby hummingbirds can't fly. All right, they can't fly. A hummingbird has to be fully grown before it leaves the nest, otherwise it's bonkers. Because hummingbirds have to be able to hover. They have to be able to hover to feed. So there aren't any baby hummingbirds flying around. If you have a baby hummingbird at your feeder, as we heard last night from Jim McCormick, it's probably a hummingbird moth. And here's a hummingbird clearwing, one of the most common of the hummingbird moths. Here's a little video of the hummingbird clearwing feeding on purple milkweed. And you notice it's sticking its proboscis into every flower on that flower head. Okay? Now you can see why somebody might think that's a hummingbird, because the wings are transparent, don't have scales on them. Notice how the tail is actually flared, like a hummingbird tail would be flared. And when the mouth part is extended, the proboscis, it looks like the bill of a hummingbird. Except you got 2 antennae in the way. You're never going to have a hummingbird with antenna. Okay? Just ain't going to happen. And here's the other one that Jim mentioned last night. This is the snowberry clearwing. And it even looks more, I think, like a hummingbird than does the other clearwing. All right? Again, tail spread, scaleless wings, and you can really see that coiled up proboscis that can be extended pretty far. Diurnal moths, daytime flyers. And incidentally, this is the hummingbird hawk moth. And guess where this occurs? In Europe. In Europe. Is it a hummingbird mimic? Ooh. 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 Is it a hummingbird mimic? Look at the eye on that thing. It sure looks like a hummingbird, doesn't it? It's not a baby hummingbird at your feeder. So that brings up bonus myth B. All right. And bonus myth B, hummingbirds occur worldwide in warm climates. Well, no, they don't. I'm getting frustrated with these myths by now. And all hummingbirds are found only in the Western Hemisphere. There are no European hummingbirds, there are no African hummingbirds, there are no Asian hummingbirds, and obviously there are no Antarctic hummingbirds. Okay? They're not going to do well there at all. So they only occur in the Western Hemisphere. Now they probably originated elsewhere. There are hummingbird fossils from Germany from the Eocene period. Okay, there also are hummingbird fossils in Wyoming from the Eocene period. So they may be originated much further back in Germany or in Europe, and then at some point that population disappeared and the one in the Western Hemisphere managed to survive. Okay, and where did they probably originate? Well, that's kind of interesting too. Now we have rufous hummingbirds that occur as far north as southern Alaska. Okay? And the southernmost hummingbird is this bird right here called the green-backed firecrown. And it occurs as far south as Tierra del Fuego, which is not the most pleasant place in the world if you're a hummingbird. It gets pretty darn cold down there. But what a huge range. What a huge range. But it's all Western Hemisphere. All of them. Well, what's really interesting, here's the equator. Okay? And here is 10 degrees north latitude, and here is 10 degrees south latitude. That's called the equatorial belt. And within that equatorial belt, 2/3 of all the hummingbird species exist. There are 366 living hummingbird species right now, and 2/3 of them are in that very, very narrow equatorial belt. All right? As you get further away, you get fewer species. There's only one species in Alaska, and there's only one species in Tierra del Fuego. So the closer you get, the more species there are. That's true of some other things too, what? The closer you get to the equator.
Birds.
What?
Birds.
Birds? Yeah, in general, birds. What else? What other kinds of organisms? What? Bats. Somebody say bats? Bats. All right? If bats are more plentiful closer you get to the equator, what else must be more plentiful? Insects must be more plentiful. All right? And if insects are more plentiful, probably plants are more plentiful. And that's true. So if you look at the way the Western Hemisphere is set up, you get to the tropics and you wonder why when you go to Costa Rica on a field trip, why you're surrounded by flora and fauna. It's because there are a whole heck of a lot more species there. And hummingbirds are among those species. Costa Rica has 51 species of hummingbird. All right? North America has 15. That's a lot of difference. Okay. So this is a cool statistic, I think. It's just amazing. All right, so are hummingbirds worldwide in their distribution? Well, here's Tarzan of the apes. Hangs out where? Africa, right? So if you're watching a Tarzan movie on television and this hummingbird zips into the picture, then you know that was not shot in Africa, but it was shot on some movie lot in California, and that's an Anna's hummingbird coming in to sit on Tarzan's shoulder. Okay? So you know how it is in movies where they play the sound of the red-tailed hawk when they show an eagle flying, right? Well, if you got a hummingbird in a Tarzan movie, it's the same kind of mess. Somebody didn't do their homework. All right? So we're going to bust that myth if you don't mind. All right? So we're almost finished except for one thing. The ultimate hummingbird myth. And some of you may have guessed what it is, but don't give it away. Don't give it away. So I want to tell you a little story here very quickly. Here I am going to Costa Rica, flying in a jet airplane, looking down at the Gulf of Mexico as I go over, and sitting there in my seat, drinking my non-alcoholic beverage, because I'm flying coach, and this guy in front of me gets up on his knees, and I'm wearing my Operation Ruby Throat t-shirt. And he gets up on the knees and turns around and looks at me over the seat. And he said, "Is it true?" Here comes the Mythbuster and me coming out now. Is it true? Is what true? Is it true that hummingbirds fly and migrate on the backs of Canada geese? Is it true? And I look out the window at him, and I look at him, and I say, Canada geese, they often migrate at 25,000 feet in elevation, right where we are right now. Do you think a hummingbird could make it up here? And he said, I didn't think so, and he turned back around and sat down. So. Victory! I smashed that myth with him. There was no question. But you may have heard this myth before. And where it came from, I have no idea, except people must think, how could a poor little teeny 2.67 gram hummingbird the size of your thumb fly 1,500 miles across the Gulf of Mexico and go to Central America? It cannot happen. And because they think it cannot happen, it won't happen. So, with regard to that, Canada geese aren't even going the same place as ruby throats are going. Ruby throats are going down here, and the Canada geese are stopping off in Virginia and the Carolinas and going to the rice fields. All right? They're not going down there. And that can only mean one thing. Hummingbirds must be flying on their own. And they're not migrating at 25,000 feet. They're migrating at treetop height. Because they're flying over land, and they've got to eat 10 calories a day. And so what are they doing? They're flying at treetop height, and they're looking down for your hummingbird garden, which has bright red, purple, orange, yellow flowers that are laden with nectar because they're all native plants, adapted for pollination by hummingbirds. So they're not way up there, they're down here. And it's much safer down here anyway, because you get up there in the wind, you've got big problems. You got to watch out for bats up there too, you know. So down here, and they've actually seen hummingbirds flying across the Gulf of Mexico in the curl of the wave, so that the wave is breaking the wind for the hummingbirds, and they're just zipping along right like that. It's been observed from boats. Phenomenal. But they're not up there. They're not flying on the backs of Canada geese. So we know what they're doing. The Canada geese are flying on the backs of the ruby-throated hummingbirds. And they're getting off in Virginia and the Carolinas, and the hummingbirds are going low, unloaded the rest of the way, and probably very grateful for the whole thing. So that's the real myth. I'm not going to bust that one. That must be true. Hummingbirds are carrying the load. And if you believe that, then you probably believe I migrated from South Carolina on the back of a house sparrow and came to give this lecture tonight. And that's not true. That's not true. Okay? So I'm going to bust that myth as the ultimate myth. But in closing, let me say, if you've got any more myths, I'd like to hear about them. But probably right now, you can seek me out over the next couple days. I will bust those myths whenever I can. But we do have some non-myths. I'm getting there. This is not a myth. Not a myth that Operation Ruby Throat exists, the Hummingbird Project. If you haven't been to my website, it's rubythroat.org. Okay, it's also not a myth that Hilton Pond Center exists. As the host organization for Operation Ruby Throat, it has its own website, hiltonpond.org. And for those of you who already know, allow me to mention This Week at Hilton Pond, which is my more or less weekly blog about all aspects of natural history. And right now, I'm on 805 archived photo essays, which boggles my mind. And you can subscribe to it for free. Sign up today if you want. It's not fattening. Or you can send me a email at thisweek@hiltonpond.org. And I got one other not myth for you that nobody else knows about. This was my first book called The Piedmont Naturalist. And just in the past month, I have come out with volume 2, and they're both available on Amazon for $9.95. You are the first people to know that this book is now available, so I'm sure you'll be bringing up Amazon Prime very, very soon and helping out the cause. So, that's it. I do have time for 2 or 3 questions.
Native honeysuckle,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
native honeysuckle is
Native honeysuckles, yes, particularly coral honeysuckle, or trumpet honeysuckle it's called. Yeah, that's Lunicera sempervirens. But non-native Asiatic honeysuckle is useless. Yeah, they don't feed on it at all. Go ahead.
Myth number 2 is about that you had some yellow spots of year-round hummingbirds. From banding those hummingbirds, do you know for a fact that those hummingbirds are staying there year-round, or if they are migrants coming from the north and migrants coming from the central?
They're not staying year-round. They're not breeding here. They're leaving in the spring.
Okay.
But I've had rufous hummingbirds that came back for 4 years in a row to the same location. And they're going off to breed in Colorado or something, you know, or Washington State, and they're coming right back to South Carolina, the same place. But they're not spending the winter there. But who knows what's going to happen? Who knows?
So, but the ruby throats then are not really staying there year-round, they're just found there year-round in Florida?
The ones in Florida? Okay, well, let me think. No. In South Florida, you can get some year-round ruby throats that are breeding there, but not very many of them. There are very, very few. For the most part, south of Tampa, they're not a breeding species. I didn't make that very clear. So,
Okay, I understand.
okay. One more? In the back?
Yeah, ruby throats in the Caribbean?
No, they are not in the Caribbean.
They're not.
No.
So they strictly migrate over land?
They migrate. We don't know how they migrate. I've been dreaming all my life about putting a transmitter on a ruby-throated hummingbird. But, you know, it's this big and transmitters are too heavy. We now have some transponders that are used in this whole MODIS program you may have heard about, which passive transponders. There are some tags that can go on a hummingbird that only weigh 0.15 grams, which is phenomenal. And I really would like to go to Central America and tag some birds there, but they're also $400 a piece. And I don't have a budget that allows that. But some of those hummingbirds are going overland through Mexico. We're almost certainly. Some are going right across the Gulf. But we don't think they're going Florida to the Yucatan, for example. We think they're going over to the curve of the Mexico. Yeah, that's what we think. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe we need to get some geese that follow those hummingbirds to see where they go. I don't know. All right, thanks for being here, everybody.